Welcome to LaunchLeft, a space for famed creatives to launch the next wave of music rebels, and also an intentional space that highlights and empowers all artists for whom radical creativity is not a choice,
but a necessity.
I'm so glad you did it this time. It's great.
Because you put your hand out.
I was like, come on, do
I have
it.
to say something.
Today we have such a special guest. Who we got?
Today we have Bat for Lashes, which is not her name, but that's the name of the band.
Her name is Natasha Khan.
Natasha Khan. And she was like happy with the fact that we equated Natasha Khan with Shaka Khan.
Shaka. And we had so much fun with her. What a light in the world. Every time we talked to her about her, she changed the subject to
everybody and everything else.
Right?
Yeah. Lifting up anybody and everything, and she was just special and wonderful and sweet and talented, and it was an absolute pleasure.
Everything she's saying is true.
So listen up, folks.
Listen up. Also, she launches the incredible Juliana Barwick, really rad launched artist. So you'll tune in, rate and subscribe, follow us on all socials at LaunchLeft everywhere.
This boy, he plays the cat and I play the toy, and he puts me all over town. He takes me up and then he brings me down. He holds my hand and then he takes a bite.
Hi, sis.
Hey, sissies.
How you doing?
Good.
Great.
Better because we have Natasha Khan with us today. Did I say your name right?
Yes.
Natasha Khan.
Whoa, this is a first.
Shock me.
This is a first.
Shaka
Shaka
Khan.
Khan.
Shaka Khan.
I'm so glad you said that. I've been doing that my whole life. Tasha Khan. Natasha Khan. Yeah.
Love Shaka Khan. Natasha Khan.
You have to say it like that every time.
Natasha Khan.
You do play instruments.
I do.
You write
Multiple.
on piano? Mostly?
I write on piano, but also have written on guitar and also using like synths and samples, and sometimes I might start with a beat. It just depends.
And when did you first say, must find music expression?
I think it was around the age of, prior to this, I was dancing, trying to learn the dance routines to Dirty Dancing every night after school, and buying True Blue by Madonna when it was my first record. We were always singing with my mum in the car, me and my brother and sister, like a lot of music in the house. But actually playing was probably when I was like 7 or 8. We got a piano, and I was really bad at lessons because I think I just had a real issue with sight reading. I found it really difficult, and I didn't really like playing other people's stuff because I just wanted to make up my own songs.
That's a good sign.
Yeah. Megalomaniac from the start. But
No, songwriter is what I was thinking.
yeah, songwriter, exactly. And
Same
then
difference.
we're all insane. But I'd put my ghetto blaster on the top when I got a bit older and press play and record, and then just improvise for hours on the piano. And I remember I actually used one of those pieces of music when I was 11 on my first record. It's like a hidden sample, but I found it and I was like, this is so sweet. I should bring it back. Yeah, it's a special thing to have music as a kid.
Absolutely. How old were you with that recording that you used on the record?
11.
I think I was about 11.
I missed that part. Sometimes I'll just miss whole.
Yeah.
I might come back and ask
Your
the
eyes
question
just
that
glaze
you
over.
already
That we just got finished discussing.
Yeah.
That's fine. I like
It
that.
happens for
It's
me.
good to be thorough.
Yeah, or just
Or disassociative.
Yeah, I can't figure out
Sort
what
of. We're not sure which one it is.
Yeah, no, I think, like you just said, megalomaniac and songwriter is sort of the same thing. But I did have this really interesting theory recently that I read about, which is that little kids, like if you have any kind of trauma in the household or anything difficult that happens, that a lot of musicians are they use music as their main attachment bond. So you kind of attach to a creative thing, and then that becomes your lifeline, and the relationship with that thing becomes almost addictive. And I think it can be like that can come from like some some difficult things. So yeah, I think we kind of walk a fine line.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah.
Not only as a creative or that being your medium of creation, but I think music particularly speaks to teenagers. I mean, whether you're actually creating, right, or not, songwriting or whatever. I mean,
it's powerful.
It is.
Yeah.
It's what. Oh, look at this little lovely buck who's showing up all those beautiful flowers. That's so Natasha Khan.
Thank you for those lovely flowers.
Of course.
They're lilac in color, aren't they?
They look like meadow flowers, and they remind me a bit of England. So I thought I'd bring a little bit of, natural, billowy, something
The
poetic
East End of
into
England has got those going on.
I mean, yes. In the flower shops, no.
The few patches of green that we have.
The few patches of green. Next to my house, actually, is Victoria Park, and they did a thing recently where they let the whole periphery of the park is allowed to grow wild to encourage bees and butterflies. So you do, it sounds crazy, but in Hackney, you can walk through meadows of wildflowers, which is awesome.
Beautiful.
To help the animals.
Yeah, please
That's,
go ahead.
No, that's a jinx. We both went,
We also just ordered the same exact thing at the restaurant.
yeah, we did.
warm
That was,
tortillas?
well, yeah.
No, she tried. That was the one thing she went rogue and got a warm tortilla, didn't
then
eat
didn't
it,
want
and then
it.
tried to get everybody else.
I've been
in her
offering warm tortillas today
To everyone
wherever I
who walks
go, and nobody wants it. It's very
Yeah.
strange.
I don't mean to go back to it, but I feel like it wasn't fully explored. I wanted you guys to like nod your heads and be like, yeah, and then like have your own stories about it. But I don't. Is that like that point in your life in that teenage angst aspect of life, music does become such an important lifeline, right? And that, right?
Somebody's got a teenage kid.
No, but I was also a teenager not so long ago. Like it's really fresh.
I actually just talking about Tina. I'll tell you about my thing too. But I just was a teacher for 10 weeks at a continuation school in downtown LA. So it's like mainly like Black and Hispanic kids and kids that are have dropped out of school and are having difficulty completing their high school points. I mean, I don't really understand the high school thing here, but because I was a teacher back in England, they let me come and teach their kids. And but it was so amazing because a lot of them were really interested in music, and we did like meditation, stream of conscious writing. Wow. We did collaging. They're all like between 14 and 18. We got like wine crates and made dioramas of their like what they would consider their safe internal space to look like, because a lot of them come from really troubled homes, or they don't really feel that kind of but what's so interesting is they don't have that time to sit and contemplate. Like I used to have my Walkman in, and like you say, like The Cure Disintegration was on continuously, or just like Nirvana or like Sonic Youth or whatever it was that expressed my angst and my rage and difficulty and sadness. It was just always there, and I had time to wander around like in nature and think about how I felt and sit quietly and read and everything. But what was so crazy with these kids is like, how do you like we're trying to make these dioramas, like how do you feel, what objects or colours would describe like when you feel safe, what's the colour of it, or what, is it nature, or is it like a mall, or is it your house? And so many of them are just constantly like texting and tweeting and doing all the stimulation stuff that I think it was so arresting for them to just consider these things, and some of them were just like they couldn't even like get to that place. So I totally noticed like a difference between I think all teenagers are kind of angsty obviously, but there's an added pressure nowadays that I didn't realize which is just so much distraction in that teenage mind that's already confused and like going over and over itself. And so I just wanted to take them all to like a lake and just be like, can we just sit quietly for a minute? But we brought in like the meditation thing at the beginning of every class, and at the start like they'd do it and then their legs and feet would be fidgeting and they'd be like looking around like it's really uncomfortable for them to sit with themselves. But then by the end of the 10 weeks they were all like dropping into it and just loving it. And they all made like amazing, I'll show you pictures after, but they just made the most beautiful artwork. And some of them who had never painted before were like painting mountains, and I was just like, this is so cool. Like it's definitely in there. And we would play music as well, and I was playing them all sorts of weird like soundtrack, you know, instrumental music, and they were like, what's this, miss? It's weird and stuff. but you know, like all the senses, like trying to kind of
That's incredible.
What was this program that you...
It's like a continuation school downtown, but it's they basically just started that school in the last year, and they've since changed the name, so I can't remember the new name, but I can tell you after. But the course leader is this woman called Denise that I know, who's done so much community work. She's really amazing, and they get in like 4 or 5 different artists practicing whatever the word is, artists, to come in and each design their own course. So you do it 2 days a week for 10 weeks, and then at the end you present the work. So we have filmmakers. They did a documentary about homelessness in LA, and like they made packages for homeless people with like sanitary towels and painkillers and like, you know, like a clean pair of socks and stuff like that. And then they made a film about taking that. It was so cute. It was just, I was crying the whole time.
Yeah, of course.
Just like, but
and this is all happening during like I've noticed, because I follow you on Instagram, that the amazing amount of breadth of work you've been doing around your record, including directing a music video, and just that it's high concept. Like I always love a concept record, so I was immediately drawn to it. And this, I'm assuming you were teaching this course during a lot of some of that as well, right? Because you've been really busy, from what I could tell artistically, for your record.
I like being busy.
I know, yeah.
I think when I first moved here, the meditation thing I started with teaching prisoners who are coming out of prison, and I did that like the first year I moved here, because I moved here and I didn't have that much to do. I just finished my album before, and I just hate not generating things or like being able to like interact. And I found LA quite isolating and lonely compared to, you know, Shoreditch or whatever, you know, Hackney, like walking around and seeing people walking past you, and you just get that, you know, New York's the same, like that energy. I love that. And so I moved here and I was just in Highland Park like, hi, and I didn't know anyone, you know, had a few really sweet old friends, but they got fed up of me trying to come and watch movies with them every night. So I was like, I need to do some stuff. And so I started with the like asking people that were doing like community work, because that's my background, is being a nursery school teacher or that sort of thing. So I did a bit of that, which gave me some structure, because I like having a few days a week. Even as a creative person, I miss like being in a work environment.
Makes sense.
And then I went to Death Valley and did loads of paintings and lots of like photography, and started writing a script for the Lost Girls film. And that's how like it just started kind of creeping up on me. But yeah, in times of stress or like loneliness, or if I have creative blocks or something, I'll go and do something like the teaching thing, or go and learn how to illustrate children's books, or I just think it's really important to keep it rich, but not always in this chosen medium that people think of you as, because I just think you have to exercise the muscle in all areas, and interacting with humans is like the best stories come out of that.
Amen. Do you feel like that was a quality that was ingrained in you, instilled in you, to have that sort of like chutzpah, or that like get up and go to like try new things and fill your time with something that, or do you feel like that's something that you've practiced and learned and seen has worked? And how do you keep that sort of discipline in your life? I think
it's interesting, because I've just been thinking about this a lot, because just thinking about kids and like how much they're affected. And what I realized is my dad's a very sort of famous, successful squash coach from the 80s, and
I didn't even know there were famous squash coaches.
Yeah, so basically there's a Khan dynasty of squash players who were #1 world champions for years on end.
Whoa.
And they all came from northern Pakistan, then they moved to London. And so my dad coached my cousin Jahangir Khan, who was #1 world champion for like 12 or 13 years.
Whoa.
But what's so cool about that, and the reason I love Karate Kid and Rocky and films like that so much, is because my life was an 80s sports film, like an 80s sports romantic comedy, because we'd get up really early in the morning. My dad would wake up at like 5 or 6. They'd have their like full, Puma tracksuits. Yeah. There'd be like raw egg shakes and sit-ups and like really intense working out, and loads of different kids came to stay with us. So our house was always full of like, Jonathan Power and Ian Sly came from America, and we were like, wow, they're so gorgeous.
This
just
was
like
the romantic.
Yeah, this is the
version of it.
romantic version, is like just having crushes on everyone that comes to stay, and then my dad kind of tutoring everybody. But he was very he was disciplined and focused, and like, we're going to be #1. Like, that was his thing, is like, you're #1. I remember him saying it to my cousin, and I wasn't really involved in the sports side of things, but I think just seeing that dynamic, like his get up and go, probably just, it obviously went into me. I didn't realise it did, because I was a really bad teenager and really naughty, and I got kicked out of school, and everyone was like, you're going to be stacking shelves in a supermarket. And then
It's nice.
yeah,
vote of confidence
I remember
for a young lady.
I remember that's what like my family would say, because they were just so angry with me, because I was so rebellious and so bad.
Because you were an artist.
Yeah, and I was right. I was like, but I'm writing poetry. Like, I don't understand. But I think, I just think it took me a while to come out of that fog of the teenage madness, which I think we underestimate is so hard. And then suddenly I sort of became this like SWAT. Like, I went from the duck to the swan, and I was like, I'm really determined. Like, I want to do this, and I'm going to work my ass off. And I just became this really hard worker.
What do you remember, if there was like a certain shift, a certain thing, some inspiration, I don't know, that brought you, or was it just a hormone that brought you from the ugly duckling to?
Gosh, what was it? It was probably like, my mum brought up 3 kids on her own. So like, we didn't have much money, and we had a very, she was very stressed about not having money, and she was quite vulnerable in a lot of ways. And I think I went out to work pretty early. Even though I was at school, we were always encouraged to have jobs. And then when I left school, before I was like, I don't know if I want to do university or anything. I didn't really know what I wanted. And I was conscious that like, I had to make money. And so I did a bunch of really bad jobs in like factories and receptionists at like really boring places.
Can you give us like hi, this is blah, blah,
like,
blah.
Hello, this is Natasha Khan. You've got through to Sharp Limited. How may I help you? Like,
well done.
Whatever.
Right.
Stuff like that. But so I was doing really boring jobs. And then me and my first boyfriend, who I was with for a really long time from my teenage years, we saved up to go to America for the first time when I think I was like 19. And because we were obsessed with all the beat writers and like Jack Kerouac and William Burroughs, and like just really into like the idea of New York and San Francisco as this like holy land of culture and like things we loved. And so I remember working like 11 hours a day in a Christmas card packing factory for a whole summer. And we got out, like, it was a suburban boring, I grew up in a very sort of suburban boring place, but I think that's also good for artists sometimes too. We left there and we arrived in New York and stayed in like a flea bag motel with weird paintings of nudes on the walls and people like, get out of here, like the thing.
So the Chelsea.
And, but like, people screaming and the beeping of the cabs and like, I just felt like I was in a Woody Allen film, and I was like, this is so amazing. And it lit up every cell of my body to like elevate me into this place where I just thought, there's eccentric, creative, like weird, free people kind of living this alternate lifestyle that I never knew existed, because my family was pretty mainstream. And we, you know, I played piano with a trumpet player and a drummer in like a crappy youth hostel, and like we'd play to like get free, you know, free board for the night. And we just traveled around. We went to Yosemite. I just like saw these giant landscapes I'd never seen. And we went to Mexico too, and that was in like 2000 or 99, when Tulum and all that hadn't even really become anything yet, so it was barren. And it was just like, we got this, you know, someone said, oh, you should go there. So it was just this amazing moment. And when I got back from there, I was like, all these books and films and things I've loved all this time, they're not just plucked out of nothing. Like they come from creative minds. They come from a culture that I can tap into, and there's a lot of that in England too, but it's not so romantic, because I guess somewhere else is always is more like mysterious. But it felt like a shift.
Wow.
I think it's the freedom as well as a parent, to give your child the freedom to like go off and be like, I don't know what I'm doing.
And your mom was really supportive in that way, or did you just kind of go off regardless?
We were pretty independent kids. Like my mum was just busy trying to keep things together. Yeah. And I used to run riot a lot. Right. So I don't even remember asking her.
Where do you stand in the line of the three?
I'm the eldest.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Just like me.
How was your, like, were you like, did you travel? Were you naughty kids?
We traveled all together. Yeah, we were like together. A nomadic group.
We lived in a mobile home a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Okay, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
We would park at national parks, and that would be like our house
for months.
For like, yeah.
And it was five kids, two parents and 2 dogs.
Yeah. Oh. And it was all in like a mobile home. It was super fun though.
Was it really like, because to me that sounds so magical, and I wish that happened to me, but because I had the opposite. I lived in a house for 20 years growing up. Do you feel like you'd be so different if you just lived in one place?
Oh yeah, we'd be vastly different. And I don't think at the time we probably romanticized it, or thought it was like some great romantic dream, but looking back I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah. It's it's hard to make friends when you move around a lot. Or you finally make one, and then it's like, we're leaving. What? I have one friend.
But
looking back, and my one friend is still my very dear friend. Like she lives here in LA, and I just saw her last night. So yeah, it's and she would travel with us. So then they'd be like, well, bring your one friend. But I have definitely, I was thinking about it last night as well, as it is so romantic looking back that we literally traveled as a family in a motorhome and like pulled up to Leo Carrillo State Beach and just lived there out at Malibu. And, just we would go to national parks and just live for a week or two, camp, hike, and make food in the mobile home. I mean, it was really one of those things where you're like, wow, that's not like a normal, well, and that's kind of what, we're really into that left of center world.
Yeah.
That's what the podcast is. We talk to artists like you and different people. They just get their opinions on what where the creative comes for them, and from especially like when it's an indie artist and people who already are kind of like, no, we're going to go a little bit outside the mainstream, what makes you tick, or what inspires. And so I think some of that does come from our own realization that we've always been a bit outside the box and okay with that, like actually
unconventionality is like a breeding
quite
ground.
into that. And it's really neat to get an opportunity to talk to other artists who exhibit similar signs of not normal.
Conforming.
Non-conforming. Yes, that's better. But so I love hearing that you just kind of had the wandering spirit and took off, and then you kind of knew then that you wanted to live in the U.S. and work and be a creative in the U.S. Like
I didn't want to live there yet, because I was still quite young and like very attached to my brother and sister and family and stuff. But it was like this sort of holy grail that I discovered, and I kept going back. So I have, like I've been living in LA for 3 years, but I lived in New York in like 2008 for a while, and I think I've been to America every year since, just always going to the coasts. But having that little gem in my heart of like seeing Yosemite, and like you say, just sort of seeing bears and like sitting under giant redwood trees and stuff, I always was very attracted to like the not necessarily just Native American mythology, but like the mythology of like ancient nature and stories in all cultures. But when I came here, I just felt this really strong vibration coming, it sounds so hippie, but like coming off the trees and like the waterfalls and the cliff. I was like, this makes sense to me. Like this nature is, there was a lot of like old spiritual energy in the land, which I think is very unique and like really special. And I'd been reading this book called Women Who Run with the Wolves, and that was kind of my Bible, because both my parents loved music, and my dad was especially a real storyteller, and he used to love telling us like stories with morals at the end, or like weird sort of ancient stories. And when my dad wasn't around anymore, but I think I sort of replaced his storytelling, or moments of him storytelling, with just getting really obsessed with books. And when I got a bit older and started reading the Women Who Run with the Wolves book, I was just like, these archetypes and characters and myths, I think they're just a really powerful way of creatively of touching people really deeply, rather than being very kind of on the nose and like spelling things out, like you're saying, the concept record. So for me, like concepts and characters that flesh out a narrative, kind of, there's a magic in those stories. There's something ancient that I think gets passed down, and it's sort of the bones of stories, I think, take a really long time to disintegrate. Like I think they just stay around. And so I mean, I don't even know what I'm talking about, but
I'm so enraptured with it. I'm like, go ahead, keep going. It doesn't matter. It's totally. I love how you said the bones of stories take a long time to disintegrate. That is beautiful. Yeah. It's true. I mean, I think it becomes part of our, cultural. Like whether we know it or not, it's like in ourselves, like those stories, and you're right. Like even hinting at them loosely like awakens that part of us that already knows that the moral of a story. You know what I mean? It's I liked your spin on Lost Boys with the record that you're putting out now. It's Lost Girls is what it's called, right? Yeah. And it's got all the mythological, like snake, and there's so many like mythological symbolism in it, a lot. That now I'm putting 2 and 2 together after you're expounding a bit on your love of storytelling and ancient nature, ritual type. That's really powerful. And I do think this country, like in the parts where the nature is so alive, you can feel the energy is really, powerful. I don't find it too hippie. I mean, I absolutely.
Well, you're a hippie, so
right. That's why.
Yeah.
But I absolutely talk to trees and stuff.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. I'm glad to know another tree talking person.
Yeah,
that's great. What about you, sis?
High five, guys. High five.
Okay.
Ouch!
I mean,
my arm wasn't long enough in this jacket. I was just
pour out
trying.
Instead.
No, I was just taking the piss when I said, because you're a hippie.
It's true though.
But I'm there with you guys on everything.
Yeah.
Let's
definitely
delve deeper into talking to trees, mythology, energy. I'm fine with it. Let's go.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go.
I mean, I think, I don't know what I think, but no, I mean, because it sounds weird to sort of talk about it in those terms, but for me, like, music is such a good medium of, it's like, some of it sounds so dancey and like it's pop music, there's all sorts of like styles and stuff on there. It's 80s and it's all these things, but underneath that, I'm like I'm doing like, you know, rubbing my hands together thinking, how can I sort of branch some topics that I think are really important for us and reconnect us to something really deep and sort of communal that's happening, and like all these shifts and things. And for me, The Lost Girls is a take on The Lost Boys, but it has its sort of whole own narrative, which was about, because going out to Death Valley and going to these like huge landscapes, I was thinking, I kept sort of imagining these women around, like riding on motorbikes, like this gang of women that were just, you know, like trawling the desert, and they live out there doing amazing rituals and just contacting like esoteric things and just being highly evolved spiritual beings. And then what would happen if they came into this like concrete jungle? Like how would they cope? What would they want? What would they do? And this story evolved of like, I'm in LA, I'm in this like concrete place, and I get really stressed with too much concrete because I can't like connect. I feel like there's like a crust over everything that I can't get underneath. And so I just started making this script and this idea, but it was basically just for my own survival. Was sometimes I just wish like this gang of girls would come and grab me and take me away to like, you know, that huge redwood tree or that desert, and like cleanse me with their love and like their depth
Tribalism.
and their tribal, yeah. And to me, tribalism, all that is just like love and connection and like, you know, containment, yeah, a crew. And in LA, which like we said is such a place where you really have to curate your own experience and you have to find your tribe. It's so essential, otherwise you're kind of like lost to the wind. I created my own like, you know, made up tribe of vampire women, because when they came into like the city, they'd have to turn up as vampires, like a gang of vampires, to be tough, because they're like, no one's going to mess with us, like we're bike riding vampire bitches, like don't mess with us. But then when they eventually did capture me and took me away, it's like this experience of liberation and yeah.
So deep and beautiful. And also I could just hear you talk all day. Your voice and the timbre of
I sound
it,
like a nursery
like,
school teacher.
You're a great storyteller, though. Really, I love the timbre of your voice. Well, I've only gotten to hear like one or two, because you have 2 singles out, is that right?
Yeah, but the album came out a few days ago,
already
so you can hear
did.
the whole thing now.
Oh my gosh, so now I can listen to it. Oh,
yeah.
that's so exciting.
At
And I
night,
really
driving around,
relate
preferably.
to what you said about, you know, on the surface, it, you know, yeah, okay, so it's throwing it back to Lost Boys a little bit, but female version, but underneath, like how to imbue, you know, a message that you want to talk about, or things that you like culturally would love to see. And that is literally, you know, what Molson made a record, and that's always like on the surface, you know, it's for my brother and it's called River, but like really like what I want to talk about is the universality of loss and how we all struggle with losing people, you know, like why don't we talk about death more? Basically, I want to talk about death.
I said that like last week. I was saying that was my like poster for the week. Yeah.
And I'm really interested in having like just saying that even, and seeing if that helps people begin to even think about it, because we're so scared of it. Yet it's the twin of life. It's the other half of why we're here. And I don't know, in Bhutan, they say like speaking about or thinking about death 5 times a day brings more happiness. Yeah. And like just brings culturally, we are so shut down around it that I've found that it was very liberating for me to even like include my brother and create a record that was like an homage in a sense, but within that it opened up that part that was like, you know, that shuts down around death, right? And so that was really eye-opening to me, how liberating that was for me personally. And I tend to always want to like the personal becomes universal. Like I want to have conversations about that. When things move me, I'm like, oh, does it move you too? Is this something you would, you know? So I also totally respect and get that like surface version of the record versus what you hope will happen organically. Like again, you can't really like go, hey everybody,
message.
Yeah, we're gonna tell you about what's the
but
at the same time it's sort of like just opening a little portal to like, hey, Anyone think about
But
this
there's
stuff?
a nuance, I think, for like people that are great artists to me are people that respect that nuance and the grey area between commercialism and creativity. Like the deep muse or like the voice that comes through, I think needs like full respect and just to be channeled. But then sometimes it's tapping into the zeitgeist and like being aware of, you know, like themes and sexy, like cool things that make people feel alive. Like to me, that's Lost Boys and, you know, the bridge. And I went to the bridge in Santa Cruz and like the mythology and the red leather jacket, like all that stuff. You're like sassy and cool. Like you need that too. You don't just. So it's that blending of the two, of the two sort of opposites, that there's this like alchemy that comes in the middle, and then you hit people and they don't really, you know, some musical films just hit me so hard because they lull you into thinking this is cool and this is fun, and then suddenly you're having like a death experience, you know, like or like a huge, like a scene where something terrible happens in a film. You're just like, you're fully in it, and I like that. It's the tension and the release.
It's interesting you said before, I know that sounds very hippie, and then we had that whole thing, and it's very weird, and it just made me think. And then you were talking about your record and your hidden record, and just thought about how interesting it is that the more we talk about things, the more we normalize them, and the less they become, you know, weird. Right.
Stigmas or whatever.
Exactly. And it's interesting because here we are in a room, 3 women that seem to be pretty like-minded, and even in that, you know, you saying, oh, this sounds like hippie, and then Rain saying, and I was just sitting back going like, yeah, it fucking does, you guys sound like, and yet you know what I mean?
But it makes sense. Yeah. I think it's just that we were probably always there before this world that we live in now. Like that was where we came from, and so now everyone's like, oh, it's so weird to go there, but actually it's kind of like it's the original place. Like peeling back those layers and going back is just going home rather than something new and weird. Because I think a lot of people are like, that's new age, and I'm like, what does new age like? New age is, it's not a new age. We're in a new age of weirdness.
That was coined back before the new age, so it's just now.
Yeah,
not new, right?
Yeah, but I think there's been a lot of suspicion because we've created this. You know, like I'm just thinking back to this really amazing hike, like a walk I did in Angeles Crest, and I went with a load of friends and we camped. Talking about your childhood, we camped out, and my dog Janice came with us, and she was sleeping in the guitar case, and we were like playing by the fire. It was so nice. And then we decided to go for a walk to see the sunset from the sort of precipice of the mountain, and so we all walked up like Lost Boys, you know, like the Peter Pan ones, with our staff, and like we went up there, watched the sunset, and then we just all sat quietly, and I guess we were sort of meditating, but we didn't say we were. And then when we walked back, we all had brought torches with us, and I was like, why don't we just try and navigate back in the dark? Like, this would be fun. And so, because I'd been reading something about it, and I was just interested to see if it came true. But what happens in the pitch black dark, because it was pretty dark, is you know, like your ears turn on and like all your hairs stand up on end, and you guys know, like you can see really pretty well in the dark, and you just become an animal. Like you're just like, you know, I was like prowling through, like no one can mess with me, I know what I'm doing. And you get this confidence, and you get but this connection to nature, because your periphery, everything around you is important information. And then I'm here, and I'm like, I'm in the supermarket, it's like air conditioned, there's lighting, you know, we've got concrete, there's no dirt or dust or like things you really have to deal with. I'm never freezing, I'm never too hot, like everything's temperate. I mean, I guess at the moment in the summer it's not always temperate, but just in general, like the Western world is catered to make us so comfortable. Yeah. And I'm like, this isn't where we come from. Like we're using this tiny amount of our senses. And so the joy that you get from sensory pleasure is brought down too. Like when I'm just in this nice moderate room with the air conditioning, I don't feel like I did on that mountain. Right. You know, like I reckon having sex on that mountain would be so much better than having it in a hotel room. Do you know what I mean? Because you're just like, you're alive. Like there's something different. And that's, to me, that's like the natural state.
Right, not
That's so
manufactured.
cool. Hey, do you mind if I ask you a question from someone who wrote in a question?
Yeah.
We sometimes do this on the show. Chris, actually, he did the logo for LaunchLeft. He did my record cover. He's a brilliant graphic designer. And I told him that we were going to speak with you today. His name is Chris Tucci. And he was like, I love Bat for Lashes. And he has a question for you.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. There is a haunting and unearthly synth-driven sound to your music that feels nostalgic, like a lost relic from 1985, created in the same universe as Kate Bush's Hounds of Love, or a score from an unreleased John Carpenter movie. Lyrics aside, the instrumental is powerful and could easily stand on its own next to any new wave, dark wave, neon, noir anthem. Yet your lyrics are just as powerful. What drives your writing process? Does the instrumental come first, or does it vary from song to song?
Wow. Thank you. That's a beautiful question. It's really nice. It does vary from song to song, but with this album specifically, I wanted to use those old synths that I'd heard in all the films that ever made me feel great, like The Goonies and E.T. and Karate Kid, and like all those like magical scores from that time where kids get on their bikes and like ride down the thing in their hoodies, and you go ding, 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 and they're like, I want to go. And I just, I had a Goonies themed 9th birthday party. I was like, I'm obsessed with those films. And to me, it's like the DNA of, it's like it's imbued in my DNA as to when I hear those sounds, it does something. But what I wanted to do is take those old synths, so we used Junos and Prophets and Evangelists and like vocoders and like all these amazing old synths, but to treat them in a modern day production way, so that I was also adding, things like 808 drum beats or, more modern sounds that when you combine them together, that never would have been done in the 80s, but there's something new again happening between the two opposites. And so I'd start with a lot of like synth chord patterns, but then we would program beats that were kind of maybe inspired by like Iranian pop music or like some other weird thing I was into, and then I'd add like a vocal that, spoken word vocal that's inspired by the Shangri-Las, like a 60s girl group or something. It's like there's all these things that I'm like, oh, this needs to meet this thing, like they might get on really well. And it's like you're like matchmaking all these different eras and instruments. Amazing. But the overriding theme is that neon synth driven, like dark noir sort of new wave thing, because it's just my happy place. Like, and I think it's a lot of people's happy place, because I think the 80s might have been the last time where they made those sorts of highly like sentimental films with kids that are just like, like trying to do good things, and there's some optimism and like expansion to it, whereas
independence and autonomy at a young age, and in a tribe way, though. Totally, right? They're finding each other and doing them together in a wild sort of way. Yeah,
which is the best. And like nowadays, you can't let your kids play outside or whatever. All these new sort of intense paranoias that have come about, I think, from training about children, like children's development. And I remember learning at school like how so supremely important play is for kids. Play and recess and creativity, which are all the things that have been budgeted out by our crappy presidents. That in unsupervised play is where all children learn about social dynamics. They learn how to share, they learn how to cooperate, they push themselves to the edge, they take risks, like climbing trees and jumping off, like that. It creates like intelligence in the brain in a way that just being stuck in a classroom where you're not allowed to be free. I mean, we know that.
You have follow through and you see that you're going to be okay.
Risk taking. So I think just like kids need that. I mean, that's something I feel really strongly about, and it makes me sad that they like have stopped art classes and stuff. I'm just like, what would I have been without my art teacher? It would have been really weird. Weird world. Anyway, not to get too sad.
Well, I really like that even when the question is to you and about your music and what you're up to, you always turn it around to a universal like truth and thinking of others, and like that's so what we jam on here. Like that's really that's why we like, really that's a big part of talking to artists. It isn't just it's not meant to be an interview show. It's a conversation, and it's about these things that we all deal with or, you know, see the troublingness of life, and how do creatives manage to use their creative in a way that can help change some of the things that are really painful, you know, like, and I think that goes back to definitely a belief in that the creative is really transformative, and it's awesome artists. It's often artists who are on the front lines of change, who are choosing to make their work echo in a subtle way, ideally, because I also like when anyone hits it over the head or stands on a soapbox, it can be
jarring.
Yeah, just it's not something I tend to like, you know, but you can feel kind of like what you were talking about with making a record and having a concept that's hidden and the forward-facing concept, right? And I think that's what a lot of good artists are able to do, is there's imbued in the work is so much richness of really what they're trying to say, but they're not trying to hit you over the head with it. And like I just also just like how it's like, you know, you could spend this time just talking all about you and your project because it's that friggin' interesting. And seriously, and like I think would make for a great 1 hour conversation just talking about Lost Girls. But every time, even that it's brought up or a fan writes in and asks a question, you like manage to still say, you know, you answer the question, but you go back to caring about the world, which comes to one of our questions we always ask, like with everything going on, is there one particular thing, and then activism is a word that might help you get to what we're talking, that you champion or feel really like moves you the most, or that you really, I know you just spoke about play for children.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it is.
I mean, I guess if it was to be anything, it would be taking like meditation or play. I mean, it's harder to take play into a school that doesn't kind of make space for that, but I think the meditation stuff has been very powerful and moving for me to see young kids, especially teenagers, that are really struggling with this crazy new set of rules that we're living by right now. And prisoners too, like female prisoners especially, I think. But I taught a bunch of guys, and I mean, not especially, why not? Everyone obviously needs to be kind of shown how to sit with themselves and have some kind of semblance of reflection, because I think that's where like the truth comes from. That's where you develop a relationship with your intuition, and that's where you start to see through some of the bullshit that people try to sell you, like it's scary to get old, or like you need lots of money to be happy, or you want to live in a concrete jungle instead of hug a tree. Like I feel like we all have this innate knowledge. And if I was to champion any activism, that would be it, because there's so many things like animals or the environment or all these things I feel passionate about, but unless there's some mass consciousness awakening, none of that's going to change. You could run yourself into the ground trying to work for one particular cause, but it starts with self-knowledge, like know thyself. That's like one of the most important, you know, things that was ever said, I think. So that's what it would be.
Right on. That's a great one. And what about some influences for you musically that like really, when you were a kid, what were the first things, or what you know made you go, I want to try this out? Or do you have any? You don't have to either if you don't.
It's probably, well, Shaka Khan is a good one to mention at the start, because what influenced me was memories of sitting in the car with my mum and my brother and sister, and all of us singing like I feel for you, ooh, you know, like leaning out the window, and Joni Mitchell, I love you. Thank you. I had to like fan my jacket that you gave me.
It's so good,
appreciation
on you.
For that. But it's like the joy. And I went to see Michael Jackson when I was like 9 at the Bad Tour, and I was obsessed with Madonna, and that era of the 80s, the pop music was so like, I mean, it was on fire and so like happy. That that was probably like my first, and like singing, you know, Stevie Nicks, or like listening to Fleetwood Mac or Hall & Oates, and that stuff that my mum was into, and a lot of soul and Motown music. So I think I attribute my my love of lyrics and storytelling in music to Motown, because they're like 3-minute novels, you know, like these crazy dramas, or like Tracks of My Tears, or Heard It Through the Grapevine. Like they're telling such a deep, real story in 3 minutes, and it's so catchy and so joyous and like full of soul, and like you just want to move. And then teenage years, it would definitely be like The Cure, and you know, all the sort of punk, like, you know, post-punk and new wave stuff I was really into, and just like all the weird guitar bands that I
New Order,
loved.
Love and Rockets, like
and
Bunnymen.
Echo and the Bunnymen I really liked.
Susie and the Banshees.
I liked Susie. I actually loved The Cure more than, I didn't listen to Susie and the Banshees that much, but loads of people say that they're like, oh my god, it's so Susie, and I'm like, I didn't really know her, but The Cure was kind of like that, you know. But yeah, so and like the Cocteau Twins, and you know, all the sort of like like that kind of music, and I just describe it that way. But I love all music. I love classical music. I can't really choose anything. I think it's just having like an appreciation for all of it.
That was a great answer.
Just one other thing that I was just thinking about. So you were
to be one other. Are you signing your
You're
name?
very shy.
No, there was like, like
just one little.
there's something skeevy over there. I was wiping away. I was just thinking about how you were saying know thyself, right? That's the, and then what came to mind for me was to thine own self be true, right? Which is sort of in
thing,
it's. And then I just was thinking, what do you do, maybe, if you don't mind answering? Like, is there something that you find that you do when you aren't being true to yourself? Do you find that you get to that place still in your life at different times, or
that I'm not being true to myself?
Yeah, that maybe you're not being true to yourself, and you see the consequences of that, and within that, maybe what are some of the things that you practice or do to bring yourself back to balance?
I definitely regularly find myself in that place. I'm not, like, as a creative person talking today, like that is somewhere where I'm very comfortable, and I you know, I've really refined like my process, and I understand very quickly how to channel things and make stuff and put it out in the world, and like that to me is my saving grace. Like, if you know, that's the thing I can do. Other things like, you know, relationships or self-love, or like just basic things like liking myself, like that has been a lifelong, you know, not a struggle, but just a relationship with myself that's been very like up and down, and sometimes destructive. And like, I think just being creatives are such sensitive people, it hurt, like it's raw, like it hurts to be alive a lot of the time. And you know, and I think we're all much more vulnerable and sensitive than we let on, and it's tough. Yeah, like it's a daily process for me to just you know, I have to talk to myself sometimes and just be like, you're lovable, like today's going to be a good day, like you're okay, like you know, like you're safe. Or I guess what it is just learning to parent myself has been like, it sounds so therapy or whatever, but it's actually true. Like there's a very wounded little child inside of me that, you know, that's probably why I started doing what I do. But she's still very present, and like I have to spend time with her when I freak out, and just be like, you know, just, you know, nurture her, or just be like, what do you need? Like what can we do to kind of level things out?
Do you ever tell her she's number one?
No, but I probably should do. I don't know. You're number one. Maybe. Probably should do, yeah. Yeah, so I think I'm quite a sensitive, vulnerable person, and I'm quite shy sometimes, and I find like performing really hard. You wouldn't think that necessarily, but I think so many creative people I know are probably that way. So yeah, it's just I think just loving yourself and then loving others is like will be my greatest achievement when I die. It's not like, oh, I made how many albums or whatever. It's like, did I really honor that person with like the amount of love that they deserved? And did I, honor myself with the amount? Like I had like a scare, like a few months ago, like a breast biopsy where we had a cancer scare. And I was in the hospital on my own because I didn't know that it was going to happen. And it was very like, like it was just a really random like thing. They found a lump and they were like, we're going to do it now. And I was just like, the thing that I thought about in the corridor when I was waiting to go and have it done was just like, nothing matters except for like the love between me and my family and the people, my friends and my loved ones. Like I just thought about that. I thought, if something does ever happen to me and I'm not going to be here anymore, I know that the people that would remember me would know that they felt how much I love them. And like viscerally and deeply, like there wouldn't be a question, and I would hope that I'd leave everybody with no question as to how much I love them. So I think, that's a pretty deep place to go, but that's really all that matters. Like I just know that that's all that matters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Can I get one too? Stretching.
Don't pull a muscle in your
I know.
arm in a
Don't
nice
pull my jacket muscle. Like, whoa, that's a beautiful place to land for our. I kind of feel like we should just keep talking for another chunk of time too, though. But the one thing that we do here on LaunchLeft is we have our guest big up another artist, tip their hat to someone that they think is up and coming and really doing something in the wide world of music that maybe no one's ever heard of.
Well, I guess it would be good to big up people that I've made friends with and met since I've been here, who are like really beautiful, amazing artists that I respect and have developed like loving friendships with. I really like Juliana Barwick. Do you know her?
I don't.
Okay, so she's the same age as, like, she's almost 40. She's a badass.
Almost 40?
Yeah, in October.
Whoa, Libra?
No, Scorpio.
Me too.
Are you?
Boy, here we go. Here we go.
That's the biggest high five of all. Like, Scorpio, yeah. Woo. What are you?
Not a Scorpio.
What are you?
I'm a Capricorn.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Oh, nice.
Earthy. No, I like that.
Yeah.
I like the Capricorn. No, it's good. It's good. My mum and sister are Taurus, and I like the combination of the water and earth signs.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Juliana Barwick. So I went to see her play the other night, and she basically loops these incredible, almost like orchestral layers of her vocal that sound like a whole choir of women singing, and then she plays like synths and piano underneath, and it's got a bit of a Julie Cruz Twin Peaks vibe to it, but then it's like it can be almost like Enya, kind of like celestial sounding.
Neat.
It's so cool, and she sang a bit on my album, and she's just a wonderful person, and her music's gorgeous. Like, she's got albums worth of music.
Really, it's such a pleasure to sit down with you, and what a special being you are. Thanks for being on the
Thanks for
planet
having me.
and
It was
teaching
really nice.
school children and meditation and making insanely beautiful music.
Thank you.
Can't wait to see what this next record, the next video, and where
Whatever
you just
goes.
keep creating, and it's really powerful to witness. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. Hi, this is Natasha from Back for Lashes, and the artist I would like to launch is Juliana Barwick with her song The Magic Place.
LaunchLeft aims to create an intentional space that highlights and empowers all artists for whom radical creativity is not a choice, but a necessity. LaunchLeft begins with music, but its ultimate aim is to launch left-of-center artists in all creative fields.
Everybody, who's that dancing?